Thank you, Evelyn.
Yes, thank you, Evelyn. I'll explain afterwards during the Q&A why we do that in my family. Okay. And this is much more interesting than the laser pointer. For those of you who weren't here last year in November, well, actually a year and a half ago in November, I did a presentation on who fired Lew Wallace and when. And confessedly, I sort of thought that everybody would understand why that would be an issue. And one of the first things that happened after I started talking was that somebody spoke up and wanted a quickie course in what went on at the Battle of Shiloh that would have anybody fire Lew Wallace. And I suddenly said, I think that's my next talk. So I've been working on that ever since, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. There is a quiz, and that is figure out where I got the subtitle from. What happened and why. I stole it. It's from a book by a writer much more famous than me, but with the same first name. That's your hint. And so, yeah. Okay. Now, which direction gives me the direction I want to go? Chris, your buttons aren't working.
We just tested this. Didn't we just test this?
We did test this. Oh, you guys.
We just did. Like literally. Anybody
Stop.
that should work. Why? Oh my God. We just
okay. Yes, the mouse.
That's my laptop. That's my YouTube.
Okay. So the issue in the battle is very simple to explain, and I'm going to do it rather quickly. At the beginning of the battle, if you've ever been to Shiloh, even if you haven't, Lew Wallace's division, which was one of the veteran divisions in Grant's army, was camped about 5 miles away from the rest of the army at a place called Crump's Landing. Don't ask me who Crump was. I've never looked it up. On the morning of April 6th, and there's a lot of stuff we can talk about regarding the early morning of April 6th, but Grant issued an order which he thought should have gotten Lew Wallace to the scene of the fighting, say around maybe as early as 12:30, certainly as early as 1:30 in the afternoon. This veteran division would be very useful, obviously. It showed up at 7:30 at night. That's the why. That's the what happened. That we want to investigate why it happened. So, a second way to present this to you is with some maps, Chris. And I have to use two maps for the simple reason that I have never seen a book about Shiloh, wrong way, a book about Shiloh that put all 6 of Grant's divisions on one map. And the reason is that there is 5 miles between Lew Wallace's division at Crump's Landing and the main body at Pittsburgh Landing. This is Pittsburgh Landing. The coloring is probably for the most part obvious. Pittsburgh Landing the area is heavily forested. That's the green. The pale yellow is the many open fields. Shiloh is a battle that is defined by open fields. Sarah Bell's Cotton Field, the Duncan Field, and my favorite, the Russian Tenant Farmer Field, which is way back up here. The orange blobs that have somebody's name in them are where the federal divisions were camped. So Sherman was here, Prentiss was here, McClernand, of course, was taking up the most room as befits his general personality, etc., etc. The other map shows, well, this gray area roughly corresponds to this area. And yes, maybe I should have recolored that green, but I didn't think of that until 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I was not going to make that change at the last minute. So Lew Wallace's division is up here. It only has 3 brigades, one of them split in 2, roughly at Crump's Landing. One thing that's useful about this map is that here we see Sherman, so you have some sort of point of reference between the 2 maps. This bit down here is the same as this bit right here, where Sherman is camped. So the issue is, Wallace was 5 miles or so away. He was sent an order. We're going to discuss how that happened. And 5 miles, he ought to have been able to do in an hour and a half. And it took him until 7:30 at night. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Jim?
Sir.
Yeah, may I add too, for those who may not be all that familiar, this early battle, I mean, it's within a year of the beginning of the war. Some of the divisions that are noted there had already participated, as you said, in some battles like Forts Henry and Donelson. I'm familiar particularly with the one toward the bottom of the green map called Prentice. A lot of those men had hardly ever fired a rifle in training, much less in anger at the enemy. So you had an incredible diversity of no experience at all. And when do we get to fight the rebels again?
Let me piggyback on that since you brought it up. Several of Prentice's regiments did not show up at Pittsburgh Landing until the evening of April 5th. So a significant fraction of his division began the morning way back here, and their first order was literally to march to the guns. And they forgot to issue ammunition to the 15th Michigan. The other division that's very green is Sherman's division. It's better officered because Sherman is a veteran of First Bull Run and just knows what he's doing. But the placement of the divisions was not with an eye to defending the camp. The 2 greenest divisions are the 2 divisions that were hit first. The other green division somewhat is Hurlbut's division. So to pick up on that. Now, these are the 2 main guys, U.S. Grant on the left, Lew Wallace on the right. The handout has 6 minor players. I'm a former actor, that's why I phrase things this way, that play a significant part in our story. One of them is William Wallace, the other Wallace, as I will try to refer to him in this story. So we're going to take a largely chronological approach. That's boring, but it's the only way to get through this quickly. Early rehearsals were going 90 minutes. So I've cut out a ton of stuff. So what we're going to start with is April 6th. Grant got some real bad news on April 5th from his perspective. A bunch of promotions had come through. In particular, John McClernand, who was a veteran commander, but he had been promoted Major General of Volunteers. That made him the 2nd ranking officer in the Army to Grant, whose promotion to Major General occurred a little bit earlier than McClernand's. It also made him the senior officer at Pittsburgh Landing. Grant trusted McClernand about as far as I can throw a bus. And so for that reason, they were moving headquarters to Pittsburgh Landing. You can spill a lot of ink and make a lot of points that this should have been done earlier. That is true. I used to argue against it and excuse it, but no, it should have been done earlier. But it's happening this morning. So they got up early. According to some accounts, Rollins was up as early as 3 a.m. Rollins is Grant's adjutant. So they're packing up to go. They're having an early breakfast. they can hear skirmish firing, musket fire, coming from Pittsburgh Landing. That's not unusual. There have been skirmishes on the 2 or 3 previous days. It's unusual for being this early in the morning. And then it becomes very unusual at 7:10 when they hear artillery fire. Now, we've got a good timestamp on that because the battery commander is a Confederate named John Trigg, commanded an Arkansas battery supporting Claiborne's brigade, made a point of, after he told his brigade to open fire, opening his watch and noting the time, and it was 7:10. Now, we're going to start talking about how we're measuring time and how we're measuring speed and distance. I'm going to say, and this is an assumption, I'm going to say it took them 20 minutes to finish all the last minute stuff they had to do to get the boat loaded up, get steam up on the boat, maybe load the horses on the boat, and set off. I'll be honest with you. That's rigged in order to give a departure time of 7:30. Now, it's in the handout discussions about this. We don't know how fast the boat was going. We don't know how fast the Tennessee River current was going. Those are unknowables. We don't know where the Tennessee River channel was. So maybe the boat wasn't going a straight line to Crump's Landing. Maybe it had to go back and forth across the river, as is often the case. But what we're going to do is we're going to assume, just to have something to base our thinking on, that the boat was doing a net 5 miles an hour faster than the Tennessee River current, based on a straight line course. If we have to wiggle across, then we can assume the boat can go faster. These boats could maybe do 8 to 9 miles an hour in still water. Why are we worrying about this? Because Lew Wallace said nearly every time he talked about this that it was 8:30 when Grant's boat, the Tigris, pulled up alongside his boat at Crump's Landing, and he and Grant had a very fast conversation about what was going on. So all of this is basically what we're assuming is that the boat and the river have the characteristics that it's going to take an hour to get from Savannah, where Grant was headquartered, to Crump's Landing. So they have a very fast conversation at 8:30. The conversation is real quick. Have you heard the noise? Yes. What do you think? Sounds like a general battle. What are my orders? I need to know more about what's going on. General, I want my orders now. I need to know more about what's going on. Be ready for any orders you get. Bye. That's it. Wallace is very consistent that that was the essence of the conversation, including his repeated insistence that he wanted orders now. But Grant wanted to get to Pittsburgh Landing and find out what's going on. He didn't want to just issue orders on the basis of some noise. So, now here is a thing that, in my opinion, nearly everybody who has written on Shiloh ignores and forgets. If it's going to take the Tigris an hour to go against the current, the 5 miles from Savannah, Tennessee to Crump's Landing, how can it take anything significantly different than an hour to go the 5 miles? It's not the same 5 miles, but it's 5 miles from Crump's Landing to Pittsburgh Landing. I'm a mathematician, but I appreciate physics. I mean, it just can't be done. It's got to be about an hour. So if you look at Shiloh books, they'll estimate Grant got there at about 9 o'clock. What? Did the boat double its speed? No. Grant had to get there at 9:30. That's the only thing that really can be rationally concluded. So they ride inland and they meet up with William Wallace, the other Wallace, at about now a mile inland And if you work out, and again, I'm doing a lot of arithmetic based on things like Hardy's manual and so on, you can ride a horse without trying to kill it or the rider, about 15 miles an hour. So it would take about 4 minutes to ride a mile inland. Grant meets William Wallace and gets a debriefing there. What's going on? Wallace fills Grant in. Based on what William Wallace tells Grant, he decides what he wants Lew Wallace to do. And he issues an order to his adjutant, John Rawlins, right then and there. He tells him, we'll get to the content in a few slides. He tells him to ride back to the boat where the aide Baxter is left on the boat, according to most accounts. And tell Baxter, convey the order to Baxter, and then Baxter takes the boat to Crump's Landing, because that's going to be the fastest way to get there. And then Baxter is supposed to deliver the order to Lew Wallace. Now, again, given how fast the horses could get there and so on, I am going to again assume, but I think it's a reasonable assumption, that the entire transaction, riding inland, talking to William Wallace, issuing the order to Rawlins riding back to the Tigris, so that Rawlins gets back to the Tigris at 9:45. Gets off his horse, remembers to advance the slide. Why Baxter? That slide really tells it all. Any aide that was going to go to Crump's Landing was going to be gone for at least an hour and a half, possibly 2 hours. And Baxter was probably the aide Grant felt he could do without the most. So Baxter got the job. Now, there's only one problem. Baxter is not a military man. He's the oldest man in this entire story, I believe. And he's not a military man. He didn't go to West Point. He joined the Army because what can I do to help? And he had spent his career outfitting expeditions from St. Louis to the West Coast. Grant thought that those skills would be good for a quartermaster. So he was the quartermaster on Grant's staff. So now we talk about the order. Rawlins goes and finds Baxter on board the boat, probably doing quartermaster things, paperwork. And he says, Grant wants you to go to Crump's Landing, and here's the order, blah, 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 blah. Baxter immediately objects. I want a written order. Why? He's never done this before. So they literally search the boat to find a piece of paper. The piece of paper they find, this is one of the colorful bits of this story. It has tobacco juice stains on it. It's got somebody's dirty boot heel on it. It was found on the floor of the salon, not the saloon, the salon room on the boat. So, okay, they give back, Baxter gets a piece of paper, gets a pencil. Rawlins dictates the order. Rawlins is Grant's adjutant. What does that mean? That means that he's the guy who has the authority to sign an order by order of General Grant, John Rawlins, AAG, meaning Assistant Adjutant General. He didn't sign it. Gail Stevens, who wrote the book Shadow of Shiloh, which was a very valuable resource for the talk last year, notes this, that he didn't sign it. But she doesn't take the next step. If he didn't sign it, he probably, Rawlins, did not read it. In other words, he did not check his work. As a 40-year mathematics professor, I always told my students, it's not a race to the end. Get it right. Take your time. Check your work. He didn't check his work. So that's probably the big mistake that was made, which is why it gets an extra large oops. Now, writing in 1886, Baxter did say, Rollins signed the order. Of course, at that point, Grant was dead and Rollins was dead. But Wallace was adamant, and his entire staff was adamant. The order was not signed. So I'm thinking Baxter was maybe doing a little bit of covering somebody's whatever. But now we've been ignoring. Did I? Okay, never mind. I thought I skipped a slide, but I don't think I did. So now the order gets delivered. Baxter and the Tigress have to get from Pittsburgh Landing to Crump's Landing. What's different about this trip?
They're with it.
They're going downstream. So instead of the current taking speed away, it adds speed. And if we assumed, if you remember, that the current was going 2 miles an hour, then now the Tigress is going 9 miles an hour to get to Crump's Landing. So it gets there a little more than a half hour. I called it 10:35. Baxter gets off. There's nobody there. Well, actually, there is somebody there. There is a horse, a saddled horse, tied to a tree. However, nobody has suggested that the horse was named Mr. Ed. So the horse was unable to tell Baxter why he was left there. Wallace, very thoughtfully, had ordered that the horse be tied to the tree. Make sure the horse has a saddle. Make sure the horse is used to being ridden. He didn't tell anybody to stay there so that when Grant's aide got off the boat, Grant's aide would know what to do with the horse. Baxter just, he just waited. Now, this is something else that's a problem with all of the let's get Grant to Pittsburgh Landing earlier stuff. If he gets to Pittsburgh Landing earlier, Baxter leaves earlier, which means Baxter waits longer to the point of being totally unrealistic. Doing this with the timing that I've worked out, it is reasonable. Getting there at 10:35, he cools his heels for about 40 minutes. Nobody shows up. Why does nobody show up? Well, we'll see why in a minute. Meanwhile, Wallace is getting nervous. If you remember when I talked about their meeting, his meeting Grant as the two boats briefly slid past each other, he was impatient. He wanted orders. Well, that was at 8:30. Long about 11 o'clock, Wallace is about this far from marching off in whatever direction he thinks is best without orders. He sends one of his aides, a man named Ross, I believe his rank was lieutenant, down to Crump's Landing, and there's Baxter. And he just sort of innocently asked, "Excuse me, sir, or Lieutenant, do you know where I can find General Wallace?" "Get on the horse, follow me." So it's about 11:30 in the morning when Baxter delivers the order to Wallace. But Wallace says, "Okay, men, break out to eat lunch." Wallace was in a hurry to get going, but he gives his men a half hour to eat lunch. Why could they have not eaten their lunch in the half hour between, say, 10:30 and 11 while they're waiting for the order to show up, or between 11 and 11:30 while they're waiting for the order to show up? But now that they have the order, he's going to give them another half hour, so they have to, so they get to eat. It's not until noon that the division begins to move out. But now we finally get to the fun. What did the order say? Well, depends on who you talk to. Now, both of these recollections come from a year later, 1863, and I'll explain why in a moment. Rollins's version is as here. You will move forward your division from Crump's Landing, leaving a sufficient force to protect the public property at that place to Pittsburgh Landing on the road nearest to and parallel with the river, and form in line at right angles with the river immediately in rear of the camp of Major General C.F. Smith's division. That's actually William Wallace's division. Wallace was temporarily assigned to command it because Smith was injured, and eventually the injury would kill him. But that's Rollins's version. What's Wallace's version? Directed me to leave a detachment to guard the public property. That's in both orders, isn't it? March my division and form junction with the right of the army. Well, that's in both orders, but what's missing? The road to take and where to march to. And then after the junction, he was to form line of battle at right angle with the river. That's in both orders. Now, I claim that you can get the second order from the first order if you assume that Baxter is very slow at writing. He's writing very slowly, this dictation Rollins is giving him, and therefore he skips sentences. Because Rollins didn't check his work, he doesn't know that Baxter has not written the correct order. But then Baxter goes and compounds the problem. Wallace, very innocently, probably thinking he's being friendly, Captain, we are repulsing the enemy.
Yeah.
He was in the Tigers. He never left the boat. How does he know that? How does he know anything about the battle? But yet he opens his mouth and sticks his large foot in it and has his own lunch right then and there. So Wallace passes the slip of paper, tobacco juice, and boot heel stained slip of paper around to all of his staff. They all read it. The last man who gets it, his adjutant, Captain Frederick Neffler, takes the piece of paper, puts it in the waistband of his pants. It's not there at the end of the day. Somewhere in the trek that we're about to see mapped out for us, it slipped out of his waistband of his pants, down his pants leg, past his boot, into the mud, and, was earthworm fodder to some nice 1862 Tennessee earthworm. So now, why are we using 1863 recollections? There's two reasons. One, nobody wrote about this in detail in 1862. I'm happy to get into that in the Q&A. To do it right now would be a big delay. That's just a fact. Neither Grant nor Wallace gave a detailed version of the order. In 1863, however, as part of the controversy that had brewed up regarding what Wallace did during his 7.5-hour march, Wallace lodged a complaint with General-in-Chief Halleck. Halleck took Wallace's complaint and sent it to Grant, who at this time was about to start the serious part of the Vicksburg campaign, and asked him for comment. Grant sent out requests to the three principal aides that we will see in the next few slides, William Rowley, John Rollins, his adjutant, and Lieutenant Colonel McPherson, and asked them to write memoranda of what they did that day. He also sent a letter to Baxter. Baxter, by this point, had left the army and had moved to New York. No reply from Baxter has been found. So maybe he sent one and it got lost. the grant papers note that the same guy, one of Grant's aides, wrote the request to all of these people, send us this memoranda. They've got the one from Raleigh, the one from Rollins, the one from McPherson. They don't have anything from Baxter. So now we need to start talking about how you get there. So I told you you would see that this is that same map from, I think, the third slide, except I turned it 90 degrees. So north is that way, and that way is west. Now, I did that for two reasons. One, it allows me to make the map bigger on the slide. Two, I'm weird. My notion of Shiloh always has the Tennessee River at the bottom of the map. That's just the way I perceive of the Battle of Shiloh. This is comfortable for me. So it's pretty much the same as the other map with a few small differences. Here's where the battle was fought. Here is Sherman's camp. Here is William Wallace's camp. This is the camp that was closest to where you would enter into this general region where the fighting was going on. This is Crump's Landing. One brigade of Wallace's division began the day at Crump's Landing. This is Stony Lonesome. A second brigade of Wallace's division began the day at Stony Lonesome. Why is it called Stony Lonesome? Can you go on Google Maps and look it up? Nope. It's a name given to the place by the troops. Why? Because it was stony
And lonesome.
and it was lonesome. And then the third brigade, which I think is actually numerically the second brigade, I think it's 132, but I'm not certain, is split in two parts up here around Adamsville. Now, I've colored in three possible routes. What Wallace did, which is military common sense 101, he ordered his division to concentrate on the center brigade. So these guys went there, and these guys came down here. Now they're late. They're going to be tail end Charlotte. But that's why when Baxter got to Crump's Landing, he didn't see these guys. They were already up there. So from Stony Lonesome, Wallace could have taken this route. If everybody had been at Crump's Landing, and a week earlier everybody had been at Crump's Landing, Wallace didn't spread out like this until about a week before the battle, then this road looks to be the obvious one to take. Problem is, it's underwater, or much of it is underwater. Tennessee has been flooding. Now, that doesn't mean that Tennessee has come up over its banks. Again, if you've ever been to Shiloh, this is tableland, all of this. It's high up. It's bluffs. The critical chapter about Shiloh in Bruce Catton's book on Grant is titled "The Guns on the Bluff." But when the Tennessee floods, more water comes into this creek, and this creek comes over its banks. So when I say some of it was underwater, what I'm talking about is this part was underwater. But William Wallace had improved that. He had corduroyed the low parts, most of them. More importantly, he had rebuilt this bridge, which until like April 3rd was washed out. So in fact, these two routes wouldn't have been open at that point. Now, William Wallace had done all of this, not at anybody's direction. And this is a consequence of Grant not having moved headquarters to the landing, I think. There wasn't a lot of central direction of things people ought to be doing. He undertook this on his own hook because people were worried, what happens if the Confederates attack poor Lew Wallace sitting there 5 miles away? How are we going to get there to reinforce him? Well, this is the obvious route, given where William Wallace is camped. We gotta get up, we gotta take this bridge so we can go this way. So he repaired that. Similarly, on his own hook, Lew Wallace was thinking of going in the other direction. Excuse me. What happens if the army at Pittsburgh Landing is attacked and the job is for Lew Wallace to come and reinforce them? He had sent scouts out, and they, I kid you not, recommended
Why?
that route because it wasn't underwater. This route is both of these routes are about 4 miles long from where they start to the bridge. This route is 8.5 miles from Stony Lonesome to this bridge. Wallace thought it was 6. Every map I've seen that Lew Wallace drew, and he drew lots of them in various letters to people talking about his side of this story, compresses that distance and that distance severely. He thinks they're much closer, though, that this creek is very close to that one, and this creek is very close to that one. He corduroyed part of the road. He rebuilt the bridges over all of the creeks. And it was going to bring him in on Sherman's right flank, right? So, okay, if there's a battle, I'm going to come in and I'm going to reinforce Sherman's right flank. What's he assuming?
Sherman's going to be there when he arrives.
Exactly. There was a very important thing that I emphasized in the talk last year, and I hate to do this to you, but anybody remember one of Wallace's motivating factors? He was hungry for military glory. And I think that influenced his thinking here. What I want to do is, and there's also this huge Union groupthink that they're messed up down in Corinth. If they come out and attack us, we're going to kick them where they don't want to be kicked. So they're not even thinking of the possibility that Sherman would be driven back. So yes, Wallace sets out on this route. Something that we cannot overlook here, 2 things, actually. Wallace did note in some of his post-war writings that the fact that no route was specified bothered him. He had a little bit of time while he ordered his men to eat lunch. Why didn't he send a cavalryman by one of those short routes to the landing to ask Grant? But Baxter's foot and mouth disease comment, oh, we're repulsing the enemy, he explicitly says that weighed a lot with me. If we're repulsing the enemy, I want to get up there and support Sherman. I want to get in on it up there where Sherman is. So he sets out that way. And I just realized in the middle of that speech, there was something else I wanted to say, and I've forgotten what it was. It'll come up in the Q&A or on the drive home, one of the two. So Wallace sets out at about noon. And so we come to the sort of the tail end of the story. The search for Wallace's division. Now we're going to go back and forth. I'm hoping your mouse will let me go backwards. Let's test that.
Probably not.
No, okay, so I'm not going to be able to do that. And that's stuck in front of everything. So everything about Grant's perspective on this is accelerated. Grant's time sense is premature. He's thinking things should be happening faster than it's possible. He's getting antsy that Wallace hasn't shown up, frankly, before Wallace even got the order, according to this time. Now, all of these times are a little shaky. I have done my best to work them out, given how fast the people could be moving and the conditions and so on. At about 11:15, Grant sends an entire Illinois cavalry company looking for Wallace. Now, according to their account, they took the river road to Crump's Landing. The people who Wallace had left at Crump's Landing, remember, to guard the public property, told him, oh, he's up at Stony Lonesome. So then they go up to Stony Lonesome. And as they're approaching Stony Lonesome, they can see the tail end of Wallace's column leaving. Now, what they don't specify is whether that is the missing brigade that showed up late or whether it's the tail end of the initial column. So it's unclear where these guys fit into things. But they fit in at the tail of that column, whatever. And the captain of the company rides forward to talk to Wallace. Now, Grant has sent a captain to try to order a major general around. This is not going to work well. The captain gets up and talks to Wallace. General Grant would like you to hurry. I'm going as fast as we can. We know the road. We're moving, making a good pace, et cetera, et cetera. According to Wallace, that's the entire conversation. The captain left. He apparently did not go back to his company because those guys were there for the entire trip. He went back to Pittsburgh Landing. It's at this point, I wish I could reverse and go backwards.
Question that on the menu that you brought up, there was a little label, you know, when you clicked on the screen that you could hit previous, and that might take.
I did not see that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Previous.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So like I said, these guys, I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they were when they set out. But they went this way, and then this way. Now, a real mystery is where they caught up to Wallace. Because their account of seeing the tail end of Wallace's column suggests it was fairly early in the march. Wallace says it was very late in the march that they caught up with him about here. Whatever, when that officer got back to Grant, more correctly, when he got back to Rollins, what he told Rollins, more correctly, what Rollins put in his 1863 memo, which went to Halleck, was that Wallace insisted on a written order. Now, I don't think there's any way to reconcile this. I mean, somebody is either lying or there's a great deal of confusion going on. But what this does is it prompts Grant, very shortly after the fellow returns, he sends Captain Rowley off to find Wallace. Rowley follows the same route, and he catches up with Wallace. No, I didn't want to go this way. Let's go to the next, because that actually works better here. He catches up with Wallace right at this creek crossing, which is why I put an R there. R for Rowley. And this is the interesting conversation. Rowley rides up. I've had the devil's own day finding you. General Grant wants you to move on quickly. Gee, you're the second guy that's come to tell me that. Yeah, well, where the hell are you going? Oh, well, I'm going to reinforce Sherman. General Wallace, could you step over here away from the men, please?
Behind the curtain.
Yeah. Don't you know Sherman's been forced back? We're at the river, and it's not clear we ain't gonna have to swim. I mean, he used different language and a few very choice words. Wallace, in all of his accounts, and he wrote many different accounts of this, very consistently gave the same basic story, including the fact that he was stunned. This just never occurred to him. So he asks, well, does Grant have an order for me? And Rowley, again, very consistently on Wallace's part, Rowley says he wants you at Pittsburgh Landing and he wants you there like hell. And Rowley starts to ride off. And here's where things again get interesting. Wallace says, no, you can't go. You have to stay with me. Rowley's like, why? Okay. What Rowley reported, Wallace said, was, I don't know anything about the River Road, which is a hell of a thing, considering that his division was camped, part of it, right here for a long time. Now, what Wallace later said was, what I meant to say, I didn't know how to get from where I was to the River Road. I can believe both of them as being true. So it's at this point that the countermarch begins. Now, Wallace has got this column strung out. I don't know how far back it would have gone, but along this road. Now, there's two ways you can reverse the march. And I don't want to get too far away from my microphone or we'll lose it on the recording. There's two ways you can do it. One is you just tell everybody about face and march backwards. Now, what this means is that the tail end of the column becomes the head of the column and they get to the battle first. Wallace did not want to do that. His explanation was that I wanted the troops at the head of the column to get there first. So what do? That's called a countermarch. In that case, what happens is the guys here they turn around and they start marching down the road past the guys that were behind them. And when the man in front of you turns around to start going the other way, that's when you turn around and start going the other way. What's the problem with this? It takes time. It takes a lot of time. And so Wallace does that, and he can justify his reasons. If he certainly spent a lot of time doing it in a letter to Grant in the 1880s. But that did slow things down. Now, can I back up again to get back to the timeline? There we come on. Yes. So Grant does not know that Rowley has found Wallace because Wallace wouldn't let Rowley come back. So Grant doesn't know anything. So later in the afternoon, and again, very much an estimate, about 3 o'clock, Grant sent Rawlins, his adjutant, and Lieutenant Colonel McPherson, who was actually an engineering officer on Halleck's staff, being loaned to Grant. Sends them off to find Wallace. Now, we don't have to reverse anymore. So they do the same thing. From wherever they started inside the fighting area, coming out this way, and they see the column going down this side road. This is the cut-through road that a local farmer told them would get to the river road. So Rollins and McPherson see the column going down there, and so they're being smart guys. McPherson finished first in his class at West Point. They know to go down there and they find Wallace. Where they found Wallace is unclear. Wallace claims in most of his writings that they did not join the column until they were almost to where they got to the river road, which is why you see me with a question mark and two different possibilities as to where they showed up. There's a problem with that. The only thing that John Rollins and Lew Wallace agreed upon about this day was that for the entire length of the time that Rollins was with Wallace, he was bitching and moaning about the pace of the march.
Rollins said.
That's what I meant to say.
Rollins is the one bitching.
Yeah. I'm sorry if I misspoke. There's too many similar names in this. Rollins talked about pitching the artillery off the road to get it out of the way. He took McPherson aside at one point as though he was trying to speak to him privately, but spoke loudly enough that Wallace heard it. Should we arrest General Wallace? And at this point, McPherson's first in West Point education showed, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But the thing, just a second, the thing is, both men agreed that this went on for a long time, which is why I'm skeptical that they didn't show up until they were almost to the river road, because this is not that much distance for Rollins to get angry or Wallace to get upset at Rollins getting angry. It makes more sense that it was occurring over a route like that. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Yeah, Tom.
Just to do a side light at this point, the other divisions have been surprised by the Confederate attack in the meantime. Prentiss has basically been pushed back and many of his men captured. Sherman's
Not yet.
pushed back, yes. So in other words, as all this has been going on, the federal Union forces are being pushed back to where W.H.L. Wallace's Orange Island is, toward that position.
They're not back that far.
Okay, but they are being pushed back.
Yeah. The Hornet's Nest has not yet fallen.
Okay,
Okay. The Hornet's Nest is about here.
and that's a sunken road where
Yes.
Union forces are making
A stand.
a stand.
And it's where William Wallace eventually is mortally wounded.
Right.
And that's where most of the captures occur. So that is the route that he ended up taking, getting out as far as that R where Raleigh found him and then coming back. And they cross this bridge at about 7:15 and go into position probably about 7:30. So that's the end of their day. Very ironically, that bridge is named Wallace's Bridge. Not for Lew Wallace, not for William Wallace. Some local farmer named Wallace built it in the first place. So, yeah, there's an excess of Wallaces in this story. So
Jim, why do you have that map? Are you saying that the original route he was going, he would not have been of any use to Sherman if he had kept to that route?
did you sneak a look at my presentation?
Never?
Okay. So what's the impact of this? Well, again, being a mathematician, I couldn't resist doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, went to Hardy's tactics book, figured out how fast in miles per hour the quick step was. It's slightly less than 3 miles an hour. So if they had taken either of the two short routes which were both 4 miles an hour roughly, they would have crossed the bridge in about an hour and 20 minutes. So if leaving at noon, that would have been 1:20. Now, then they would have had to move forward about a couple of miles to get to the firing line and deploy. So they're getting to the Hornet's Nest line at about 2:15, 2:45. The Hornet's Nest did not collapse until 5. If you've been to Shiloh, there is this huge collection of cannon that was known as Ruggles Battery that figured in defeating the Hornet's Nest. It's like 60 guns. They didn't open up until 4. So if Wallace is coming into line before 3 o'clock, it's not impossible to me that the Hornet's Nest line survives. Certainly, the collapse, being enfiladed on both sides and caught in a sack, and that's how William Wallace got shot. He was trying to get out. Would not have happened. The bulk of the casualty disparity in this battle, 13,000 Federal to slightly under 11,000 Confederate, comes from the prisoners taken when the Hornet's Nest collapsed. So the outcome of the battle, if the Hornet's Nest survives, is just totally different. And Wallace could have gotten there in time if he had taken one of the shorter routes. I think there are people, I have argued this in particular with one individual I'm thinking of, who just cannot let go of, in their view, the only reason Grant cared about this was to deflect attention from the fact that he had been surprised. And I keep trying to make her see the point. Well, yeah, but it's still, but she won't let, I wasn't meaning to give away her gender. But that, the desperate battle of the first day was a loss that don't tell me that, no doubt cost Grant's army the lives of many brave men. So, to Christine's point, to the end of his days, Wallace was obsessed with the notion that maybe he should have gone on forward. Now, there's 2 problems that he does not understand in any of these discussions. The first one I've already mentioned, which is that he was not as close to the Owl Creek Bridge, the bridge into the battle area, as he thought he was. I mentioned earlier, every map Wallace drew compressed the last 2 creeks closer together than they were. And then there's this very interesting story. He went to Shiloh for the last time in 1901. At this point, it is a park. It has a superintendent. It is a fledgling park. He's trying to get the roads that he was marching on right, because he's writing his autobiography. So the superintendent gets together a couple of locals who are familiar with the roads and stuff, and they go out, spend pretty much an entire day, and they get it down. In fact, all the maps I've used are based on that work, and they are considered to be the best maps of the 1862 road network. And so when they get to that place that was marked R on a couple of slides forward, and Wallace says, yeah, this is where I turned around. Maybe I should have gone forward. I just can't let go of the fact that maybe I should have gone forward, crossed Owl Creek, that was the last creek into the battle area. Then I would have been in the Confederate rear, and I could have eaten them up. At which point one of the guides speaks up. Pardon me, General, but I was in the something Tennessee at Shiloh that day. we had artillery and a couple of regiments guarding that bridge. Now, it's an open question, how long is artillery, unspecified number of guns, and 2 regiments, unspecified strength, going to hold off an entire federal division? Is that creek fordable there? I don't know. Was it fordable then? I don't know. Did one side of the bank dominate the other? That would be important. I don't know. Not clear Wallace knew. But it is something he mused about. He claims in his autobiography during a September 1864 visit to Grant at City Point that he and Grant regaled Grant's staff with tales of the Battle of Shiloh. Most of them had not been on Grant's staff at the time. And at one point, Grant took him aside, you know, if I had known then what I know now, I'd have wanted you to go on forward. I don't believe that for a minute. Because I don't think Grant knew anything more in 1864 that would have caused him to make that declaration. So I think they misunderstood each other. And so, if you will permit me, we will change styles, and I'll tell you my conclusions. Both men made some bad assumptions and bad decisions. But I really think you got to point to poor John Rawlins and say, it's on you. If he had proofread the order, the 2 or 3 minutes it would have taken to do it again and to get it right would have made a big difference. Baxter's "We are repulsing the enemy" is not exactly #1 on my favorite hits list. The countermarch is also a very bad idea. Gail Stevens, who wrote Shadow of Shiloh, says that Lew Wallace never mastered the topography or the roads. Frankly, and I say this as somebody who is often accused of being a Grant partisan, frankly, same thing could be made of Grant, could be said of Grant. And this is at least partly due to the headquarters having been at Savannah instead of Pittsburgh Landing. Grant was usually very good with terrain, but you don't get good with terrain by spending your evenings 5 miles away and part of your day traveling. There are lots of communication failures. Wallace actually talks about this in his autobiography. There was no guiding light to what was going on at Pittsburgh Landing. His decision to improve the Shunpike was his decision entirely. He didn't tell anybody except Sherman. William Wallace's division to repair the river road, again, nobody told him to do it. It was something he saw this as a good idea, and he did it. But again, you can put this on Grant's feet, on Grant's head if you want to. If he had been there, this is the kind of thing that a central command authority could have directed. So, final comment. There seems to have been no inquiry at all in 1862. Grant and Wallace never talked. Grant's staff and Wallace's staff never talked. In 1863, a reporter who was hanging around Grant's headquarters during the siege of Vicksburg wandered into a conversation where they're all kind of laughing at Wallace at getting lost. They thought he was just lost. Had no idea where he was and how he got there. So anyway, that brings us to the favorite slide of the evening. At which point, let me walk over and turn off the recording.
Get our house back.
Yeah.
Oh. Now, where the heck is that button?